as entrepreneurs, we all want to make a huge difference. And, there's so many different ways that we can add value to our clients and do well by doing well. But I've got somebody, a very young entrepreneur who is making a huge impact and a big difference that I met at Joe Polish's Genius Network group. And he's kind of taken it by storm here, and it's not that often a new member comes in and is able to do that. And he's the reason is he's doing something that most of us as entrepreneurs aren't doing. He's doing a lot of self-assessment on what's making entrepreneurs, his fellow entrepreneurs like you and I, more successful. But he's doing something a little bit more. He's actually writing about it. And when I say writing about it, he's really writing about it. He's the #1 writer on Medium, which is one of the major platforms out there. He's got millions of people reading his stuff. And matter of fact, when I walked out of Joe's meeting, the first time I had the opportunity to meet Ben Hardy, I picked up his book, Willpower, and read it on the flight back. I got to tell you, it blew me away. Well, I'd like to say I was the only one, but he's a best-selling author. But even more important, Joe Polish, Dan Sullivan, and Michael Hyatt bought over 3,000 copies of this. So, this is, I grabbed him, I said, Ben, and he's in real big demand. So I go, Ben, I need you just for a few minutes because I want to share you with our audience because you're going to make such a huge difference. So you don't want to miss this. I am John Bowen. You're at AES Nation. It's all about accelerating entrepreneurial success, and we're just about ready to do it. So hang in there and join us.
Ordinary success? No way. You want amazing, remarkable, exceptional breakthroughs. Dig deep, think bold, drive hard, watch yourself soar beyond your dreams. AESNation.com.
Excited to have you join us here today, and you're doing some remarkable work. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your insights with our audience.
Yeah, John, I'm a huge fan of yours, so it's a pleasure. Seriously, I love being here with you, man.
Well, it's so much fun, fellow entrepreneurs making a difference. And you've kind of come on a storm, Ben. I didn't know who you were until the Genius Network, and then all of a sudden I see you everywhere. And even more importantly, it's great stuff. And maybe give a little backstory before we go into some of the life lessons that you've learned, as a very successful entrepreneur, as well as some of the lessons that you're kind of chronicle and you're seeing as you're studying this as well.
Yeah, so just a quick breakdown of kind of my journey. I came from a very abusive background. Not necessarily that I was abused, but it was a really bad environment that I came from. My father was, addicted to pretty heavy drugs after the divorce of my parents. I barely ended up graduating from high school because there was just no stability in my life. And about a year after high school, I was 19 years old. I was living at my cousin's house. And I detail this story in Willpower Doesn't Work. But I was living at my cousin's house, sleeping on his love sack. My diet consisted of Mountain Dew, Little Caesars pizza, and I played World of Warcraft for about 12 to 15 hours a day. I didn't have a job, and I was just very depressed and sad. And I was basically the product of a really broken environment. There's a really cool concept in psychology called transitional character. A transitional character, I'm actually going to read you the definition because it's something that I'm guessing a lot of your audience is. But a transitional character is someone who in a single generation changes the entire course of their lineage. The individuals who grew up in an abusive or emotionally destructive environment and who find a way to basically take the terrible stuff from their environment and not pass that on to the next generation. So basically this is like a generational breaking human being. They break the mold, they review, what I like is when someone comes from a really bad background and then just transitions in a huge way. And that was kind of what I wanted to write about with Willpower Doesn't Work. And that's what happened to me. But how I did that is I ended up getting into fitness. I started running, and when I was out running, I allowed myself some time to kind of process what had happened in my life, from the divorce of my parents at age 11 to like, there was a lot of negative events that happened through my high school, time. And while running and being alone, I actually allowed myself to think about it and think about my future and like get out of the world of Warcraft and kind of start to think about my life. I ended up serving a humanitarian mission for my church. And it was during that time that I started reading stuff like Stephen Covey, self-improvement, a lot of philosophy, psychology, religion, spirituality. And importantly, during that time, I started writing in my journal. And I have stacks and stacks of journals, and we'll talk about journaling, later in this episode. But during that time, I decided I wanted to study psychology. I wanted to study human change. I wanted to become a writer. And I got home from that experience in 2010. And so basically from 2010 till now, I've been studying psychology. I'm almost done with my PhD in psychology. We got married. I got married to my wife, and in 2015, something super pivotal happened. And it was right at the beginning of my PhD program, and my wife and I became foster parents of 3 kids, siblings. And that experience kind of shook my world. And interestingly, it was a catalyst to my success. Like a lot of people would think, if you take on these 3 kids, all your time's going to get sucked up. But I realized very quickly that like a lot of people think, and this is one of the things I talk about in Willpower, but a lot of people think that who you are is purely based on choice. But what I found is that who you are in a lot of ways is based on the situation you're in. And when I had this new situation where I had this enormous amount of responsibility heaped upon me, I became a foster parent. I was in school. That newfound responsibility gave me a ton of motivation. So, and I talk about this in Willpower Doesn't Work, but motivation is very situational. There's a concept basically called hysteric strength, but you've probably heard the story of like someone whose truck fell on their kid and like they were able to lift their car, like doing crazy things. The situation kind of called upon them to do something different. That's basically what happened to me when I became a foster parent and was in my school. I mean, it just led me to finally start writing because I'd wanted to be a writer since 2010 and basically done nothing about it until 2015 when that happened. And then, but I'd been studying and writing in my journal, so I knew how to write and I knew how to think and stuff. And so I started writing in 2015, took an online course that taught me how to write headlines, taught me how to like pitch articles onto places like Huffington Post. And then I just started writing, and I found medium.com, and, in less than a year, I was the top writer on the website. And basically since then, I've just been writing ever since.
No, and I can vouch for you that you have been writing ever since. And the quantity, we do a lot in our group, and I'm more of an author. I separate those two components. That I've got a team of writers working with me, and so I have a great appreciation for what you're doing, Ben, and the quality of what you're doing. And one of the things I want to go to the book you wrote, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But one of the things that just really resonated with me, I've been an entrepreneur, multiple companies. I've been in large companies. I've had the corner office. I've had this and that. And one of the things you talk about so much in your book, and it's something fellow entrepreneurs talk about, but they're not as conscious about it, and it's that environment, how important the environment is that they find themselves. And this is kind of, the big picture. And maybe you could touch on that because, that was a big lesson for you in your own personal situation and the fellow entrepreneurs that you've had the privilege of working with and, playing with.
Yeah. So this is kind of a fundamental, this goes to like really the root of how people change. So if you've read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and if you've read enough self-improvement, the concept comes up over and over and over again that you must change from the inside out. And although that's true, very few of those books actually explain how it works. You know what I mean? So they say you have to change your paradigm, but then you change your environment. You basically the inside becomes the outside, but they don't really explain how it works. It's kind of mystical. And really from a psychological standpoint, people are actually more likely to change from the outside in. That's where the environment shapes you, and that doesn't mean you can't be intentional. And actually my whole book is about being proactive and intentional, but it's about also being aware that your environment is influencing and changing you. And so the smartest people in the world actually proactively shape their environment. So there's a quote from Marshall Goldsmith. He's, a famous author and whatnot.
Yeah, one of the top coaches in the.
Yeah, he's brilliant. And he wrote a book called Triggers. And in that book, he said, if you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you. And, he's a psychologist by profession. He studies, what influences motivation and behavior. And it's, more than not, it's actually situational factors. But these are the things that in Western society we totally downplay because we're highly individualistic. We very much focus on ourselves and we downplay the influences around us. And so in the book, I specifically talk about the fact that, the most successful people in the world, they purposefully create environments to shield themselves from a lot of stuff. So from a willpower perspective, willpower disappears with the more stimuli coming at you, with the more options, the more choices. And so for most people, first thing in the morning, they pull out their phone and immediately they're just putting information in their head and they're having to make choices. We make way more choices right now than we've ever made before. And a different definition of willpower is decision fatigue. This is one of the reasons why people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and stuff wear the same clothes every day, is because they don't want to make dumb decisions, because they know that they would rather use their energy and resources on better things. And so there's a book called The Paradox of Choice. And it basically means that the more choices you have, the less quality those decisions become. And so what you want to do is you want to create an environment that essentially shields you from a lot of the noise so that you can focus on the signal. You want to remove options. That's how you create and control your environment. And so you can do that in really simple ways. Like a really easy way is just first thing in the morning, don't look at your phone, don't even have it near you. You know what I mean? And give yourself the space and time to think. But you can apply this strategy in really powerful ways. And, John talked about how you and I met at Genius Network. When you put yourself into a really amazing environment where you're surrounded by people who are rock stars, who are highly motivated, who are collaborative, when you put yourself in that environment, it changes you. And so basically, rather than just saying that you change from the inside out, what I'm saying is actually, yes, you change from the inside out, but you have to do that actually by changing from the outside in. And what you do is you make decisions about what type of environments you want to influence you and shape you and alter you. That's why Jim Rohn said you're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you're intentional, you actually just decide who are those 5 people who are going to influence you. Zig Ziglar said, your input shapes your outlook, and your outlook shapes your output, and your output, determines your success in life. So, this book, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say this is so powerful, Ben, and and one of the reasons why before we turned on the camera, I said, Ben, let's go over some of the life lessons that have been so important, and to me, this is one that. I've had a private jet. I was flying around doing the investment banking stuff. Really, probably the movie star kind of image of the outrageous job, making good 7 figures, all that, and hating my life type thing. And I was with, great people, but I was in the wrong thing for me. And I was a pilot in the Navy. I didn't care that much about private jet and the whole deal. And then really, and I think of it as very intentional, Ben, that I decided I was fortunate. I had a pretty big liquidity event I'm in Silicon Valley. So a small liquidity event, but it was, I didn't have to work anymore. And what happened then is I decided that I loved entrepreneurship and I wanted to design a business on purpose. I'll tell you, I've never been happier, but one of the other things I learned along the way that you're really big on, and you touched on it, I want to go a little further, is this whole part of the ritual. I know you do morning and evening. I only have a morning one, but I mean, having that routine and, everybody that knows me, this is my business outfit, a black polo shirt. I get asked all the time, do I have more than one? I have about, 20 of them. But I'm a big believer in Steve Jobs. We also have a mutual friend, Dean Jackson, who wears the same stuff. And I kind of let's get rid of all the easy things to get rid of and then let's do really important work. But Ben, touch on the ritual stuff, because this has been, a big thing for you and, for a lot of successful fellow entrepreneurs we both know.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one quick thought, just to add to what you were saying, is there's a really famous quote. It's in the book, The One Thing, but also a lot of people use it. And basically, it's what one decision can you make that would make all other decisions either easier or irrelevant. And that's what we're talking about here. Is you make one choice that eliminates all the other ones. Those are the best types of decisions. Just as a quick example, like, if I don't want to eat sugar, then I shouldn't put sugar in my house, because if it's in my house, then I have to consciously think about it, and I have to make a lot of decisions every moment. Like, am I going to eat those Pop-Tarts? Like, if you just don't put it in the house.
I'm with you on that one, because I do that, because I am one of those. Many of us, particularly sugar. I love sugar. Well, what? Sugar doesn't do good things for me. So, it's really making those conscious decisions and having alternative things that are good for you. It's amazing what happens. But let's go to the rituals.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's a lot of psychology research. So basically, one of the fundamentals of why morning and evening routines are so important is because who you are is a product of what you do. So basically, most people think that it's your personality that shapes who the choices you make, but actually it's the choices you make that shape who you are. And that's a concept in psychology called self-signaling. Basically what it means is that the choices you make signal to yourself the type of person you are. So if you start waking up early, for example, you'll see yourself as an early riser. If you start getting small wins in the morning, something that Dan Sullivan recommends, you begin to have confidence. So there's a lot of research in psychology that says that confidence is actually an effect of success. It's not the cause of success. A lot of people think it's confident people who become successful. It's actually successful people who are confident because they made the right decisions. And so when you start doing things first, like first things first in the morning, you actually wake up when you said you would wake up, because confidence is another word for self-trust. So if you actually wake up when you said you would, and you start putting first things first, you have an actual routine where you fill up your cup, whether that be reading good books, writing in your journal, exercising, doing creative projects. By putting first things first, you actually start having more confidence, which then translates to the rest of your day. And so basically so just on the outset, most people think that confidence and motivation are the causes of success when actually they're the byproducts. Motivation. So there's a Harvard psychologist, his name is, I think, Russell Brunner, but he says it's a lot easier to act your way into feeling than to feel your way into acting. So rather than waiting for motivation to kick in so that then you can do the right behavior, if you just wake up and do the right thing first, you'll be confident, you'll be motivated, you'll have inspiration, and you'll become the person you want to be. So that's kind of the fundamentals of why a morning routine is so important. But on kind of like a behavioral level, we live in a very addicting environment. As I've already talked about before, about 80% of people between the ages of 16 and 60 look at their smartphone within the first 10 minutes of their day. And what that does is it triggers them into a reactive state where then their body and their subconscious mind take over, and they're not living proactively, they're not living on purpose, and they're not living by design. They just go through a subconscious loop, and then their day is pretty much a repeat of what they did yesterday. So one of the core reasons for having a morning routine is giving yourself space to think about, meditate, ponder. I would recommend writing in your journal in an affirmative way the goals you're trying to pursue. Think about the future you want, and then start to, there's a really, really cool and helpful strategy when you're kind of visualizing or writing about the goals you want to pursue. And that's, there's a lot of research that basically says visualization isn't enough. You actually have to experience the emotions that you expect to experience when you achieve a certain goal. So if you're thinking about who you want to be or a goal that you want to achieve, and you're spending time first thing in the morning really thinking about and even writing down, like, for example, in an affirmative way, I will achieve X, by this date, I'll make $10 million or something by this date. You want to actually visualize what that would look like, and then you want to feel what it would actually feel like to achieve that goal. And then you want to actually experience gratitude in the here and now as if you had already achieved it. Because gratitude, there's so much research about how gratitude changes your brain, but basically what you're doing is you're pulling your future into your present, and you're experiencing the emotions of the present right here and now. Dan Sullivan talks about how, there's the gain versus the gap, and how if you focus on the gap, which is like distance between you and your goals that makes you feel upset. But if you focus on the gains you've made, then it allows you to like feel excited and confident, which then allows you to move forward. Well, this strategy actually allows you to focus on the gain while at the same time focusing on your future rather than just on your past, because you're focusing on the goals of your future, but you're actually experiencing gratitude as if you've already achieved them. And this is kind of what a lot of people, Tony Robbins and others, call like a state of resolve or inner knowing. This is basically where you put yourself in a position where you know you're going to achieve your future goals. I call this a peak state, but this is the smartest thing you should do in the morning. Like basically you wake up first thing in the morning, rather than being reactive to your environment, you give yourself space. And I would actually recommend you go to a pretty serene environment. You know, it doesn't have to be like you have to go to the temple. I mean, for me, honestly, a lot of the times it's just my car, but I'm intentional about the fact that my environment influences me. So I go to a quiet place and I pull out my journal and I visualize and I think about the future I want to have. And I think about the emotional state I want to live in. And then I live out that state. And that's a concept called be, do, have. Basically, you need to be a certain person and you need to decide who that person is. And then you need to act as that person would act and you'll have what you want. So if it's, you know, you want to be a billionaire, well, what would that actually feel like? And then how would that person act on a daily basis? How would that person relate? And that is what should shape your behavior every day. And if you're acting from that perspective, then you're not going to repeat your past. So that's kind of the core reason why you should have a morning routine is to put yourself into the mental and emotional place of your future rather than your past. Unfortunately for most people, because they're, you know, triggered by their environment and they're allowing, you know, dopamine and all sorts of things to fuel their decisions, they're just going forward as if they're basically just repeating yesterday over and over and over again. So that's kind of a lot of the concept between morning routines.
Yeah, I just want to touch on it, Ben, too, because my experience, I do this every morning, and I have a step-by-step and time and so on, and I got to tell you, and I have the everything extra meditation, a little breakfast thing, and then the kind of a review what I want to accomplish, and I have 5 business goals that I focus on and 3 personal ones. And there's no right number on content, and then I do a journal. Probably not as thick a journal as you do, but a journal nonetheless. And that's made a huge difference because I'm starting every day focused on the big picture, and I am extremely the gratitude is just amazing. And I do love the concept from Dan Sullivan that mind the gap is so powerful because. We all want to be, there was a time in my life, if I ever made $50,000 a year of net income, life would be grand. Well, the number's gone up, the goals and things change. And sometimes, you look and something doesn't work out or fails even. And you can get really disappointed in yourself. But if you look at the progress you've made, it's just, instead of looking to what the ideal outcome was, you look where you started and where you ended up. There's so much progress made. But Ben, one of the things I'd like to do, you've done a phenomenal job on culture, and we've got a mutual friend, Hugh, over at the I forget the name of his company now. Gapping Void, and I'm gonna put up on the screen. Why don't you describe what is this, type thing. And then we'll dive into a couple of them with the time remaining that are some great life lessons.
Absolutely. So this is a culture wall. Right now you're just looking at 20 images, but these images basically portray values that I have. And, Gaping Void is a culture design company. I actually learned about them from Joe Polish. You'll see pictures of Joe's values and beliefs and stuff all over Genius Network. Dan Sullivan has his own culture wall, and I love their work, and I'm lucky enough that they like my work, and so they actually made me that culture wall. I don't know, do you have one yet?
I don't, and matter of fact, Jason and I just did a podcast with Jason a couple of weeks ago, so he offered to do it as well, and I've gone, where would I put it? My wife's a big, I'm my global headquarters of the 3 businesses I have in my pool house. And I go, I don't know, Jason, if I can put it up. But I'm thinking really digitally. I got all kinds of monitors all over the place. I love just showing what, you're showing here. I mean, this is really impressive to be able to capture all those values that are important to you and look and wow. And I mean, and I love the way it looks at Joe's office as well.
Yeah, if you actually scroll down a little bit on that article, people can kind of get a scale of the size they are. There's a picture of my kids holding it. Like, you don't have to scroll down too far on the article. Like,
there we go. Oh, yeah.
So that's just kind of a scale of like the size they are. They actually, they're a foot by a foot and they stick out like an inch, and they're really cool. They're basically
the kids like them too. It looks like.
Yeah, I actually have mine in my house. I work at home, so I've got my huge culture wall at my house, so my kids can be reminded of these things all day. But you can scroll back up. So I'll share just a couple concepts from this wall. If you'll pull that up. And
let me grab it here. There we go.
Perfect. So I'm going to start with. There's basically 2, because I already went over, the fact that success precedes confidence, behavior drives motivation, and also behavior is what shapes personality. There's a concept on there, and it's on the left side, second one down. It says nothing happens until after the ships are burned. This is obviously a very entrepreneurial concept. And a lot of entrepreneurs will understand this, that you have to actually make a commitment first, and then all the insights kick in. Actually, Dan Sullivan's, he talks a lot about how when you write a check, for example, like when you invest in yourself, then all of a sudden the motivation and the insights and stuff come in. And during my PhD in organizational psychology, and I know that everyone listening to this podcast is already a highly successful entrepreneur, but I studied the difference between wannabe entrepreneurs versus, successful entrepreneurs. And one of the things that was the initial starting point of what led someone to begin identifying themselves as an entrepreneur. Because if you're a wannabe at something, you don't actually see yourself as that thing yet. You're like, that's something I want to be. But if you are an entrepreneur, you say, that's me. So what was it that actually led to that re-identification? And really, for most people, it was actually making financial investments in their goal. Once a person started making financial investments, a few things happened. From an economic standpoint, there's a concept called sunk cost bias. So once you become invested in something, you become heavily committed to it. So a lot of people would say that Elon Musk is, he's got this really amazing why, he's got this motivation, and that's what's leading him to, sink all of his money into his companies and like make the strides he's making. My argument would be actually that his motivation is because of the fact that he sunk all of his money into it. He invested himself heavily, and I think that's, and he's invested himself over and over, and that's why his motivation is so high. And so, that concept is just awesome for me. Like, when you start investing money in your goals, and the more you invest, the more committed you become. There's another idea, and this is subconscious, but Dr. David Hawkins, he wrote a book called Letting Go. It's a really good book. He also wrote a book called Power versus Force. But he talks a lot about how your unconscious mind will only allow you to have what you believe you deserve. So if you look at your success right now, if you look at your environment, if you look at your partnerships, your collaborations, if you look at your relationships, they are all a product of what you unconsciously believe you deserve. And Tony Robbins would put it this way. He would say you get in life what you're willing to tolerate. So if you tolerate, bad health, that's what you're going to have. Like if you tolerate, not impacting millions of people, that's what you have. Like basically you have in life what you're willing to tolerate. You're okay with it. So how do you actually shift your subconscious mind? Well, you make bold, powerful decisions, because your subconscious is heavily connected with your memory, and your memory is attached to your emotions. And so if you want to actually shift your subconscious, you have to shift your emotions by making bold decisions. And so when you make a powerful investment in yourself or in your business, whether that be doing something like joining, a mastermind group, or just investing in education and skills, or investing in a collaboration, it basically shatters your subconscious belief system of what you can have. And it says, oh, wow, I actually know and believe I can be and do and deserve more. So that is that concept, is that nothing happens until after the ships are burned. Well,
and I think it's so important as entrepreneurs, particularly successful ones, because we don't have to burn the ships. you're at a pretty comfortable spot typically. And, if you want to accomplish something, though, you got to do it. I mean, this is one of the reasons I spend a little over 100,000 a year on mastermind groups. When I start a project, my background's in econometrics, and some costs you're supposed to ignore, but I'm a person too. So you end up having that investment, you're going to really work, and so much of this is persistence. I want to finish up on one more, Ben, and bring up the culture wall, and I'm going to go to the one that really there's so much that impresses me of what you're doing, but I think the better prolific than perfect is just such a powerful. Because so many of us as entrepreneurs want to be perfect. I mean, we're working really hard doing everything. We've got all kinds of resources. We've got teams and everything else. And, what the heck are you doing telling us we should just be prolific? I mean, what does this mean?
Well, I'm going to actually connect this with the last one. And this is something you and I already talked about. But the more successful a person becomes, the more actually conservative they become with their resources. Like when you're first starting out, when you're ambitious, you're willing to take more risks because you have less to lose. From a psychological standpoint, basically what they say is that you have an approach orientation. You're highly approach, you're on offense, not defense. What happens to a lot of people when they become successful is they shift to defense. They shift to an avoid orientation. Rather than seeking rewards, they seek to not experience risk. And in the book, Essentialism, Greg McKeown talks about how success is often the catalyst to failure. Basically what happens is you become successful and you lose your why. And so kind of connecting this to it's better to be prolific than perfect. I actually got that quote from Joe Polish, but as a writer and as a creative, I've been very surprised by some of the articles that I've written that have gone viral. So another quote is basically done is better than perfect, but you have to put out imperfect things, and this is, very entrepreneurial, but Seth Godin, he once told me, I asked him a question about just where he gets his ideas, and he says, plant a lot, harvest a few. You put a lot of stuff out there, and in a lot of ways, you don't know what's going to work. If you're so focused on creating the perfect product, you're never going to create it. And I have friends that are like that. They've been working on their concept or their idea for 5 years and they've never put it out, and they keep iterating it, but they're not iterating it based on feedback. They're just iterating it because they keep changing and learning. You know what I mean?
That's so well, and I think of just where you've gone, because I've watched you on a number of things here, Ben, that had you not put yourself out and your material out, none of the stuff that's going on right now would happen. And there's no way you had an Excel spreadsheet that, or a business plan that had the plan all done that you're doing. None of us do. But if we don't let the market forces, we don't ship it using Seth, if you don't get it out there, nothing happens.
Yeah, so there's a really, really cool idea in neuroscience that's related to this. And basically it's all about learning. So, our brains are very hardwired to seek prediction. We want to be able to predict the future. We want to know that, if I do X, Y is going to happen. And if you have what neuroscientists call prediction error, that's when you learn something new. And so, if a child, for example, touches a hot stove, they weren't expecting that. They were not expecting that. That's why they did it. And when they touched it and it burned their hand, it totally sent an intense signal to the brain. That's called a memory, and it's highly emotional. And that's what a prediction error is. And so if you're not experiencing prediction errors, you're not actually learning. You're staying in your comfort zone, you're staying in your bubble. And so one of the reasons why it's super important to just create a lot of stuff is that you actually get that feedback from the environment. Those prediction errors, you realize, oh, that didn't work. Rather than just living in your bubble and thinking that what you're creating is relevant, it's not. For the most part, you actually have to put it out there, and you have to actually have your assumptions shattered over and over and over again. And that's actually how you learn. The reason people avoid that is because it's emotional. And that's another thing that Seth Godin said is that all art or all creativity is emotional. It's personal. The most powerful businesses are, tapping into something emotional, into humanity. The best writing or art, even if it's for the purpose of business, is still emotional. And if you're going to actually create something that's important, you have to kind of feel the fear and do it anyways. You have to step out of the emotions that are keeping you blocked, and you have to get used to creating over and over again. And the challenge about doing that is that you can't predict the outcomes always. And that's, so Dr. Ken Robinson, he has one of the most amazing TED Talks ever about how the public school system is killing children's creativity. But one of the things he said is that if you're not willing to fail or be wrong, you're never going to create something original. And so basically, as a creative, as an entrepreneur, you have to step into the unpredictable. You have to do things that you can't fully predict are going to happen. You can't fully predict the outcome, and that's what freaks the brain out, because the brain wants to be able to predict it. That's why entrepreneurship takes risk. But and this will be the last concept, is there's so much cool research in psychology about a concept called tolerance for ambiguity, or tolerance for uncertainty. And it's essentially a requirement for successful entrepreneurs. You have to develop a tolerance for the unknown. That has to become your comfortable place, is when you're experiencing the emotions of, I don't know fully what's going to happen, but I'm going to move forward. And obviously you make calculated risks. It's not just, throwing it all out there, but you need to regularly be experiencing prediction errors, and that's how you learn, and that's how you then develop interesting connections and new ideas that then become very useful innovations.
Yeah, I'm in Silicon Valley, and it's I worked with some of the top tier venture capital, and nobody wants to talk to you. You have proof of concept, and proof of concept is usually revenue. And the only way you get revenue is make a whole bunch of those mistakes along the way. If you don't get out there, and the most famous term I think in Silicon Valley is pivot, is that it's really just reorganizing. But Ben, first of all, thank you for this. I there's so many insights, and you and I could go on forever. Other than we gotta also create some other things as well. And I do want to do another shout out of your book. This is a great book. There's so many good insights and lessons learned. I want to recommend it to everyone. Willpower Doesn't Work. Discover the hidden keys to success. But what I also really enjoyed, Ben, is it's well written. So it's a very readable book along the way, because there's a lot of good business books that aren't well written, but they're good enough insights that you'll force yourself. Also in the links, I'll go ahead and have, in case you want to be like Joe, Dan, or Michael Hyatt, order quantity, we'll put that link in there. And with that, Ben, I just want to thank you. Just great lessons, and keep up the good work. And for all of our audience, aesnation.com will have the transcript, the show notes, all the links. Anything, Ben, as we're leaving here?
No, man. Well, one last thing is this, and this is just to tie it all together, is that, because we're all entrepreneurs listening to this, the best thing you can do for your psychology and also just for your success is to do something today that's unpredictable. Don't just have today be a reflection of yesterday. Like, do something today that you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. And that's where you'll start to create incredible stuff.
Well said. And, a little outside your comfort zone. It's amazing what you can make happen. Your clients, your future clients, all those future collaborations and partners are counting on you. Don't let them down. Go out and make it happen. Wish you the best of success.
Predictable is boring, right?
Yeah, well, it's boring, and it's not very profitable either. So that combination. Let's go out and make a difference.
Exceptional, remarkable breakthroughs. aesnation.com